That moment changed something inside me. "You're not entitled to my affection," she said. No hesitation, no warmth. Like a statement from a judge I never agreed to stand before. I looked at her, letting the words sink in. They should have hurt. Maybe a few months ago they would have. But at that moment, standing in our kitchen with the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, I felt something else, clarity. Something in me just shut down. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't remind her of everything I had given, the time, the patience, the moments I thought meant something. I just nodded. Okay. That was all I said. She barely reacted, scrolling through her phone like I had just mentioned tomorrow's weather. That was her first mistake. She expected a fight. She expected me to be hurt. Maybe she even expected me to beg. But what she didn't expect was for me to take her words at face value. That night, I stopped saying goodnight. In the morning, I didn't lean in for a kiss before leaving. I didn't ask how she slept. I didn't check in with her during the day. I didn't ask about her plans. I didn't wait up for her. I didn't even glance at her when she walked into the room. She had made her stance clear. And now, so had I. For the first few days, she didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but thought I was just sulking, acting childish, as she assumed I always did before eventually giving in. So she carried on as usual, coming home late without explanation, smiling at her phone, giving me the bare minimum of attention. That was fine. She thought this was a game. That I was being stubborn. What she didn't realize was that this wasn't temporary. She had set the rules. I was simply following them. A week passed, and I caught her watching me. Small, subtle glances when she thought I wasn't looking. 2 weeks, and the usual confidence in her voice started to fade. 3 weeks, and she hesitated before leaving the house. For weeks, and she was unraveling. At first, she tried little tricks to get a reaction. Dressing up more than usual, standing in front of the mirror a little longer, making sure I noticed. She started mentioning plans with people I had never heard of, testing me, waiting to see if I would ask. But I didn't. She had drawn the line between us. I was just making sure it stayed there, that I gave her nothing. She tried laughter first, bright, exaggerated amusement over her phone, loud enough for me to hear from across the room. I didn't react. Then she tried conversation, small things at first. "Did you see that news story?" Or, "I ran into an old friend today," as if she could bring things back to normal without acknowledging the shift. I responded in neutral tones, never giving more than necessary. By the 5th week, anxiety had set in. She came home earlier, found excuses to stay in the same room, hovering, waiting for me to speak first. One night, she sat beside me on the couch and rested her hand on my knee, a touch that once might have fixed everything. I didn't move. I didn't pull away, but I didn't acknowledge it either. After a few minutes, she withdrew her hand. I heard her exhale, sharp and shaky. Then she got up and left the room. That was the first time she truly understood something was wrong. And in that moment, I knew she had never expected this. Something had shifted. She could feel it now. At first, she treated my silence like a game, an annoying little tantrum she assumed I would snap out of. But now, there was a crack in her confidence. I saw it in the way she hesitated before speaking, the way she lingered in doorways, as if debating whether to say something, the way she dressed up more often, her perfume stronger, her hair carefully styled. Even on nights she had nowhere to go. She was waiting for me to notice her again. But I didn't. I let her sit in the silence she had created. The withdrawal was subtle at first. I stopped reacting, stopped engaging. When she spoke, I answered only what was necessary. A yes if required. A no if that was enough. She started testing me, slipping small provocations into conversations, mentioning new places she'd been, new people she'd met, names I didn't recognize. A year ago, I would have asked. Now, all she got was a simple "that's nice." Her frustration grew. She started staying home more, even on nights when I knew she had plans. I never asked why. She tried to reclaim space between us, sitting next to me when I watched TV, standing closer when we brushed past each other in the kitchen. I ignored it. At night, she tossed and turned. Guilt? Frustration? Maybe both. By week 6, the cracks were undeniable. I was heading to bed when I heard her voice behind me. "Are you mad at me?" I turned slowly, meeting her eyes for the first time in what felt like days. She looked small, vulnerable, almost nervous. Why would I be mad at you? I asked, my voice neutral. She hesitated. She didn't have an answer, because the truth was, I hadn't accused her of anything. I hadn't started a fight. I hadn't called her out. I had simply disappeared. And now, she was feeling it. She shook her head quickly, as if dismissing the thought. Never mind, she muttered, turning away. I went to bed without another word. She didn't sleep much that night. A few days later, she tried something new. I was sitting at the dining table, reading, when she placed her phone down in front of me. Unlocked, open. An invitation. A month ago, she had guarded her phone like a locked vault, never leaving it unattended, never letting me catch a glimpse of her screen. But now, she wanted me to see it. She wanted me to check, to prove that I still cared enough to dig, to search for evidence, to start a fight. I didn't take the bait. I simply slid the phone across the table, back toward her. You got a message, I said casually. The flicker of frustration in her eyes was almost satisfying. That night, I caught her staring at me again. But this time it wasn't annoyance. It wasn't even anger. It was something closer to fear. As if for the first time, she was realizing something she had never considered before. Maybe I wasn't waiting for her to come back. Maybe I had already left. And maybe I wasn't coming back at all. The first real crack appeared when I heard her crying in the bathroom. It was faint, barely there, a muffled, stifled sound, as if she was pressing her face into a towel to keep me from hearing. I didn't move. I didn't acknowledge it. I simply sat in the living room, staring at the pages of a book I wasn't actually reading. A month ago, that sound would have made me drop everything. Now, it barely registered. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? She had said I wasn't entitled to her affection. So I had given her exactly what she asked for. The next morning, she was suddenly cheerful. Too cheerful. Good morning, she said as I walked past her in the kitchen. I nodded in response, reaching for my coffee. She waited, expecting me to say more. When I didn't, she bit her lip and tried again. I was thinking, maybe we could do something together this weekend. Go to that little place by the lake. She was testing the waters. I took a slow sip of coffee. I have plans. A simple, neutral answer, but the way her body tensed, the way her forced smile faltered, told me everything. I had always been available to her before, always willing to push things aside when she needed me. She had never considered the possibility that one day, I simply wouldn't be. Oh, she said softly. I left before she could say anything else. She started spiraling after that. I could see it in the way she hovered, her movements frantic beneath a thin layer of composure. She started texting more, not just on her phone, but on her laptop. And every time I walked into the room, I noticed something new. A screen closing too quickly. A tab disappearing before I could see it that I walked past her. She thought I didn't notice, but I noticed everything. She started dressing up more, even for the smallest errands. Before leaving, she'd glance at me, waiting for a reaction I never gave. One night, she didn't come home until after midnight. I heard the door creak open, her footsteps cautious as she stepped inside. She paused in the doorway of our bedroom, probably expecting me to ask where she had been. I didn't. She exhaled, almost defeated, and when she finally crawled into bed beside me, she lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. That was the night I knew for sure. She had been with someone else. And yet, she was the one lying awake, restless, trapped in her own choices. Then came a breaking point. I was sitting at the kitchen counter, finishing my coffee, when she suddenly slammed her phone down in front of me. Ask me. Her voice was sharp, demanding. I blinked, looking up at her for the first time in days. Ask you what? I said, my voice steady. Her eyes were wild, her breathing uneven. Where I was last night, she snapped. A challenge. A dare. I held her gaze for a long moment, then shrugged. I don't care. 3 words. That was all it took. The anger on her face shattered, replaced with something raw. Terrified. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Because she finally understood. I wasn't ignoring her. I wasn't punishing her. I was simply done. She had spent so much time trying to hurt me, trying to prove she still had power over my emotions. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I simply felt nothing. And that scared her more than anything. She had lost me completely. And now, She was all alone. She didn't speak for a long time after that. She just stood there, staring at me, willing me to take it back. To give her something. Anger, sadness, even disgust. Anything that told her she still had control. But I just sipped my coffee. She turned abruptly and stormed out of the kitchen. Upstairs, I heard drawers slamming. The muffled sound of her pacing. She was spiraling. Fast. Good. Let her. That night, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, waiting for me. Her phone was beside her, face down. That was new. She had changed into an old sweater I hadn't seen in months, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger. "Hey," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. It was the first time in weeks she had spoken to me in anything less than a demanding tone. I made dinner. I glanced at the table, 2 plates, candlelight. The effort was there, but it wasn't for me. It was for her. She thought this was a game she could still win, that I'd break if she just played her cards right. "I already ate," I said flatly, heading toward the stairs. Her voice followed me before I could take another step. "Mart, please." I stopped, turned, waited. Her eyes were already glassy, but she forced a smile, trying to close the gap between us. "We don't have to do this. We could just talk." Talk. Now she wanted to talk. After months of pushing me away. After telling me I wasn't entitled to her affection. Now suddenly, she was offering it freely, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't spent all this time treating me like I was nothing, that I was disposable. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. "You don't get to do this now." She flinched, as if the words had physically struck her. I made mistakes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. For the first time, she was the one searching my face, for an answer, for forgiveness, for hope. And she found nothing. "Yeah," I said finally, turning away. "You did." I walked upstairs, leaving her behind. She didn't follow. The unraveling continued. The next day, she hovered in doorways, lingered near me when I was home. I could feel her watching, waiting for me to engage. I never did. She tried different tactics. Anger, guilt, sadness. None of them worked. Because I didn't care anymore. And she knew it. The woman who had once relished in making me feel small was now grasping for any piece of me she could still reach. But there was nothing left for her to hold on to. Then came the final blow. A name I never expected to hear. "It was a mistake," she whispered one night, standing in our bedroom doorway. I was folding laundry. I didn't even look up. "What was?" She swallowed hard. "Him." Finally, she had said it. Confirmation of what I had known all along. She had been with someone else. And now that she had lost control, she was trying to undo it. I nodded slowly, pressing down the last crease in my shirt. "Good to know." She exhaled sharply, stepping forward. It didn't mean anything. I turned my head just enough to meet her desperate gaze. "Neither do you."